Welcome to another episode of Design in Progress. We have a very special episode tonight. We've got Joshua Yearsley from Leader Games on. He's going to be showing off the print and play that is out right now. You can go and play it. There'll be a link down below to where you can grab that. And he's going to go over all of the newest stuff from the Homelands expansion that you'll get to get your hands on and mess around with in this latest PNP that's getting close to the end as far as we know.
It's getting closer. It's getting closer. Emphasis on the.
they
Certainly, when I left for winter break
mhm.
in mid-December, I had to do sort of a long dark night of the soul moment about the bats and really shake things up when I got back. But I'm feeling really good about where things are at.
Yeah. I honestly I kind of like moments like that where you hit this like wall when you're designing and you're like, I need to put this down for like 2 weeks and not think
Hmm.
about it, and then come back and you're like, we're trashing this half. This half doesn't work. I was wrong.
Yep. Yeah, it was definitely one of those moments where I realized, the conceit is all well and good, but I'm very attached to a specific way of accomplishing that conceit, and I
Hmm.
just need to abandon it. I
Right.
need to, as the saying goes, abandon one of my darlings.
Right.
So,
It is. It's the hardest thing too as a designer because you're like, no, I'm right. I'm definitely right, and then you have to be like,
yeah,
wait, what if I'm wrong?
exactly,
Oh no.
exactly. And it's very freeing sometimes because I feel like every time you actually do it, you give yourself more permission to do it in the future.
Right.
So I don't know. I feel lighter now, and I'm happy to say
Just
that
just let it go,
I
right?
I think yeah, exactly. If we learned anything from Frozen, you just gotta let it go sometimes.
Exactly,
So
exactly. My
but yeah,
youngest is
super.
obsessed.
Yeah, yeah. Frozen.
It's
It's
just
it's
on in the
uh
background, right?
yeah, yeah, all 24/7, I imagine.
Yes, yes.
But yeah,
Uh,
no, I'm super super excited to show off all the progress.
yeah. So what is exactly getting kind of pushed out in this PNP?
Yeah. So as in previous PNPs, we'll have our latest versions of all three of the factions.
Mm,
Along with that, we're also going to release the latest version of the deck, which was also in the previous PNP.
mm,
And then along with that, we're also going to be releasing the hirelings. So we're going to be releasing the current versions of our hirelings.
hmm.
Actually, didn't even pull those ones out of the bag yet, but
Yeah.
soon
I
here
I got to
we'll
play
be
with
taking a look at these guys.
the ducks and the frogs last night, and I was pleasantly surprised by how well they were working. It's like
Pretty good.
I
Yeah,
honestly
hirelings.
they
Hirelings are a funny thing because you can really like the complexity of a system, like the difficulty of creating a system of rules doesn't rise linearly with the rules count. It rises quasi exponentially.
yes,
And
yes.
so when you're working on something like a hireling, it's just so much easier than a faction.
Hmm.
Like honest to God, like by 50 times, 100 times, it's
Yeah.
just like it's honestly night and day in terms of just like
It's like refreshing. Like at one
yeah.
point, I had like a free weekend, and I took one of my fan factions and was like, "I'll just make a hireling for them. It'll be easy." And
Yep.
like did it, and it was like, "This works pretty well. Sure." Like,
Yeah, it is not that hard to get them off the ground. Now, of course, tons of fine tuning still needs to happen.
right, right.
But like getting a hireling to the point where you can basically be like, okay, I know for a fact that I can get to the finish line
Hmm.
with one of these.
Right,
It just takes, on the order of days to weeks rather
right.
than months
Months
and
and
months
months.
and months and
I mean, I
months
do
of
feel like
improvement and effort.
they are also more self-balancing than the rest of Root, which is already fairly self-balancing because of the dynamics of
Exactly.
they're gonna get passed around. So like
They're gonna get passed around.
even if it's
Yeah.
super broken, you're like, well, it's gonna be super broken for me for 1 turn, and
Right.
then it's gonna be super broken for
Fundament
you for 3 turns.
Exactly. So fundamentally, the thing about hirelings is A, they can't just completely break the game.
Right.
And as long as they don't break the game, yeah, as you said, there are these self-balancing mechanisms. They just need to do something interesting. They
Right.
need to make the game feel interesting. So there are fewer, even though you're constricted more in word count, and you need to be clever
Mhm.
in taking a mechanic and boiling it down. There are just so many fewer things that can like go wrong and
Yes.
make you
Yes.
completely like loop back around to the beginning again,
Right.
as happens so many times with some of these factions.
Yeah.
So it's going to be the three factions, the deck, and the three hirelings.
Mhm.
We will do a release with the maps and landmarks, but we are only really just getting to like serious playtesting with that stuff.
Mhm.
The thing about doing maps in Root is that like you can't really test maps without factions that are stable. Like that's kind of it makes it so much harder to disentangle like
Right.
what might be going on.
You're like, what is wrong with
That
this?
it's
Yeah.
just exactly, and it is so much easier to start with factions than with maps because factions again they just take way longer to get the concept, like, fully right.
Right.
Like, you don't even know for I mean, in my case, with the bats, for example, I didn't even know that I was getting the framework at all right for 5 months,
Right.
basically.
Right. And because there's just
Whereas with
so many knobs to tweak, you're like, well, I can tweak
e
this, I can tweak that, maybe this, maybe wait,
exactly.
wait, maybe we flip those, maybe we change the order of it, and with a map, you're like, it's lines and circles and squares, and it'll come together eventually.
It again, it just needs to do something interesting.
Right. And it needs
Everybody's
not broken.
Everybody's on the map,
Yeah.
and specifically, you kind of don't know exactly what the map needs to do until
Hmm.
you have your new factions.
Right.
Like if you have any hope of those new maps having like cute or interesting interactions with
Hmm.
those new factions, you kind of need to know what the factions
Is gonna do. Yeah. Yeah.
do. So
Yeah. It's like,
so
oh,
yeah,
they really
so
want big
we
forests, and you made a map that has all tiny forests. And you're like, okay, well, this isn't
exactly,
gonna work
exactly.
at all.
Right, right, exactly. So it's best not to like unnecessarily restrict your design space for the factions until you
Hmm.
yeah, based on your map until you actually know what those factions are. So yeah, but we will be doing one more print and play that will basically include like everything.
Yeah.
And that will basically
Which
be
is
at the point where
a
like
long
everything is
list.
done.
A long,
So
long list. I have for our questions later a list of all of the stuff in this, and it is staggering.
I gave myself a lot of work. What
Yeah,
can I
yeah,
say?
you're an
But
overachiever.
thankfully, like that's in large part because as a studio, we can handle it now.
Mm,
We recently hired a bunch of new people. The studio is really strong, and that means that I can focus.
mhm,
And I know that like other stuff that I might have been doing in a given moment, it's in good hands.
right.
Um, like one of the really, really important things that has happened over the last 6 to 9 months, and this has been seen basically over in Arcs land, kind of as Arcs has been released out to the public, is that we have a community manager now,
Mm,
Matt Martins, who's great. And one thing that Matt does is he helps me to keep a pulse on like rules problems that are cropping up in the community and like generally like being the eye on the street for me as like ultimately I am like the rules writer for the studio,
mm,
but if somebody can be out there engaging with the community, all parts of the community, and really keeping an eye on like
right.
what the problems are,
All
being able to
dozen Discord
collate all of
servers,
that,
right.
exactly, that all the Discord servers and Reddit and BGG and just all of this stuff, it is a task like going out and like finding
Right.
the problems.
Right. People have found a
And
weird
so
little interaction where you're like, no one has ever thought of that. I don't know how you came to that
exactly.
conclusion, but let's fix it.
Yeah, and so for arcs, a great thing that that has come out of that Matt was an really integral part of is that we have a the leader card library. So
Mm,
if you go to cards.leadergames.com, basically, like if you're playing arcs and you have a question about a card in arcs, you can just search it on there,
mm,
and the card will come up with all of the FAQ and errata. And it's just like a centralized place that we are updating. We just dropped a new update about a couple weeks ago,
mm.
where like it is meant to be like the central source of truth from Leader Games, because we make complicated, intricate games that have
Right.
lots of strange interactions.
Right. And
And
it's great to
so
have that sort of, Oracle text kind of thing with Magic, like Magic the Gathering has that, where it's just like, if you have a
right.
question, come here, there'll be answers. Like,
Yeah, and in like before Matt came on, there would have been no like I was doing rules writing and designing and developing
mhm,
and doing usability testing and running rulebook moderating rulebook reads and doing all of these things, and so I was already kind of wearing too many hats at
right.
once, and so it's really great to have a partner
Right.
in like making sure that I understand like what the problems are post release.
Right.
So
Right. And let you
yeah,
focus on the design stuff. All right.
cool.
Let's hop on in.
The pun to get us started. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the lily pad diaspora, the frogs. So as I go through these factions, this isn't going to be like an exhaustive teach or anything like that.
Mm,
This is just going to be a kind of just a quick walkthrough of like broadly how the faction works. Kind of give you the elevator pitch, and then like briefly show you how things work. But we're
right.
not going to get into like every single little
Right.
nook and cranny here.
Right. We're not walking
Um,
step by step through an entire game. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. But yeah, so if you are not familiar with the Lillipad diaspora, basically they are a group of frogs and toads who are trying to integrate into the woodlands. They are basically, displaced people who want to coexist peacefully, but they're doing it at a pretty bad time. They're doing it during the middle of a civil war, which I would generally like not advise.
Sounds
But you
sounds
don't
like a
know the
bad idea.
circumstances. Yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds like a bad idea, but you don't know the circumstances of the world that have
Hmm.
created the situation.
Right.
And I'm really going to leave it to the players to think about, like, yeah, what are the situations in this world that might lead the diaspora to see this as their best option.
Right. Like
And so
we'll just settle here
essentially,
in the middle of a war. No problem.
exactly, exactly. So essentially, the diaspora, it does basically one critical thing to the game, and that is it adds a new suit, both to the map and to the deck. And so these enclaves that the diaspora have, these are basically going to get placed onto the map, and these are going to add a new suit to the map. While they're on their peaceful side, these are double-sided here. While they're on the peaceful side, they actually add a suit to the map. It should technically be over here in this fox clearing.
Yes.
They add the frog suit to that clearing. However, when the enclave turns militant, this is actually going to completely replace the suit of the map. So this is drastically morphing and warping the
Hmm.
suit composition of the map.
Right.
And along with that, they're adding these frog cards. So at the start of the game, players are going to start with one of these cards, and the rest of them are going to get shuffled into the deck. So throughout the course of play, people will get access to these cards. So these work like any other cards. They have their own suit that match the frog suit on the map. And they all have their own effects. So there's this new deck of frog suited cards. There's a bunch of cards in here. We've got dominance cards, we've
Frog
got a frog
dominance.
ambush, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, there's some pretty fun stuff in that deck. Some kooky crazy things to be able to do. I do also love just the idea of being like, oh, there's just frog crafting now, and you're like, oh yeah, there's a new
Mhm.
suit. There's frog crafting. I have to go and coexist with this diaspora and like hang out with them and then place a building there in their clearing. But
Yep.
I don't want to blow everything up because if I blow everything up, that's going to get rid of it, and it makes this so tricky to be like, ah, crap, I got to go over there, be there.
Yeah, and that's kind of the intent really in like all of the factions in this expansion, but especially the frogs and the bats, is that sense of like uncomfortable coexistence.
Yeah.
So like it's called the Homeland Expansion because I really want to explore this idea of like, well, what does it mean for different groups of people to like look at the woodland as a home?
Mhm.
Um, and if you're looking at the woodland as a home, then you're probably thinking about coexistence in some way. And so for the diaspora, this is a group of people who are trying to integrate.
Mhm.
They're not necessarily like indigenous to this woodlands. There might be some frogs and toads here,
Mhm.
like there may have already been some here, but they are really trying to, more may be coming in. You may view it as they're trying to create a coherent political identity. There's many ways that you can kind of view what the diaspora is trying to do here, but they
Mhm.
do see the woodland as a home, and
Mhm.
they're trying to integrate into it.
Right.
So let's walk a little bit through kind of how they work right now. They've seen some changes over time, but compared to the second print and play, you'll see that it's actually fairly similar. There are some changes, but I'd say that like the broad structure here is really pretty close
Mhm.
to what it was in the second print and play. So in Birdsong, basically, you just get a craft step. Normal craft step you can craft with your enclaves.
Right.
And then you essentially have a choice here. You have a choice between rally or reconcile, and this is sort of like it's your first like sharp choice between like peace and militancy. Because rally is going to give you warriors at all of your militant enclaves. So if you
Mm.
have a bunch of militant enclaves around the board, you're going to get warriors at all of them.
Right.
Gives you a warrior at each one. But reconciling is basically your way. It's like the diaspora's really their only way of getting militant enclaves back over to peaceful. So, except for some effects in the frog deck itself,
Mhm.
the frog suit itself, this is basically how you're flipping your militants back to peaceful. So you can do that any number of times you want, and then whenever you do that, whoever rules that clearing is going to get a draw card. So you can draw a card either from the deck, or from this thing called the pawns. So we'll talk a little bit about the pawns. So the pawns is basically the frog card discard pile. So
Mhm.
there'll be this little placard. And as frog cards are discarded, they actually go to this pond instead of to the normal discard pile. And so whenever you're drawing from the pond, you basically just draw the top card. So you get to know what you're getting essentially.
Mhm.
So this kind of helps players stay engaged with the suit throughout the course of the game. So like rather than just saying like, oh yeah, like frog cards are gonna pop up, you'll engage with them a little bit and then they're
Mhm.
gone. I kind of wanted there to be a more stable and consistent engagement with the suit throughout the game. So this is kind of how that happens.
Right.
So that's basically Birdsong in a nutshell. You've got your craft and you've got your rally reconcile. Then we have daylight. We have a kind of traditional three action structure here. You can just do these action up to three of these actions in any order, and any combination. We have two actions here. We have settle and we have provoke. Each one of them it's a little bit of a nitty gritty compound action that there's kind of a lot of steps in each one of these, but once you get the feel of it, it clicks into place
Right. It feels
pretty
it
pretty
feels a
easily.
little bit like advance, where you're like, wait, I move and then I battle, but then sometimes I move twice and sometimes I battle.
Yeah,
What's happening? And then
yeah, and
then you
there's a
do it two or three
funny
times, and you're like, okay, this totally makes sense. Yeah, yeah, it's
and
easy.
there's kind of a funny to give a little bit of context into this, since this is a channel about design. I'm
Right.
sure that there are people here who want to hear more about this context. The context here is that the diaspora has a very particular relationship with its enclaves. The enclaves, the way that they ended up working best is that they are kind of the crux of everything. The crux of card draw. They are the crux of scoring.
Mhm.
They're your map position. They're how your warriors get on the board. They're everything. Enclaves are basically everything for you. And because of that, the number of actions that you get to do that place enclaves is like a critical parameter in the game.
Mhm.
So, like, if it changed from three actions to four actions, each one of these actions, which we'll talk about in a second, each one of these actions is basically letting you place one of these enclaves.
Mhm.
And so you can imagine that if you get one more action that lets you place the thing that ties into literally
Right.
everything
Your
about your
entire
faction,
engine, yeah.
the entire engine just gets turbo boosted. And
Right.
so the compound actions kind of had to like grow a little bit organically around that fact, because it became apparent through a lot of conceptualizing that the
Mhm.
enclaves really just had to be like the piece.
Right.
Otherwise, the faction got it started feeling way too diffuse. It started feeling the unfocused, and
Mm.
I really, really wanted to emphasize that that core tension between peace and militancy.
Right.
And so that's kind of some context behind the way these actions are structured. So let's talk about the actions a little bit. So first of all, we got settle. Settle basically it allows you to like gather in warriors from a bunch of different clearings. So like unlike a lot of move actions where you're just moving from one clearing to another, with this move action you're actually pulling in a lot of warriors from different clearings.
Right.
So let me see where'd you go? Okay, we'll do it up here.
Yeah, we can
Um,
place things on the
Set
map.
up. Cool. So like let's imagine that we're settling in this fox clearing right here. The first thing that this action lets you do is you can move into that clearing any number of times from adjacent clearings. So you can actually pull in warriors from multiple different clearings. So you can think of this as like a gathering move.
Right.
Rather than moving from one to another, you're gathering warriors in.
Which I have
Um,
found to be one of the most interesting just design-wise things. I keep being like, "Oh man, I want like cards that do that. I want hirelings that
uh,
do that. I want
well,
landmarks that let you do that." Like I'm like, "Ah, that's so fun."
yeah, the reason why it's so important for the diaspora is actually related to the way that they recruit. So as I said before, when you recruit, you're actually recruiting at each militant enclave.
Hmm.
So your recruit is this you get a lot of recruit, but it's very dispersed.
Right.
And so basically these gather moves, it's kind of you can kind of think of it like the connective tissue from your recruits to the point that you want to like interact with on the map.
Right.
Um, so it's kind of like your and now I'm gonna it's a two-stroke engine of I get my frogs on the map, and then where do I actually want them to be?
And then
It's
frogs
gonna be
assemble.
over here. Exactly. Frogs assemble. So you have this gather move. And once you're done with the gather move, you can do one of two things. You can either battle there, or you can place a peaceful enclave there. Um, so if you rule the clearing, you can place a peaceful enclave. Um, this is going to be great for you. It's going to let you basically it's your means of scoring and means of drawing cards.
Yeah.
Um, and then the only other thing to know about enclaves, you can only have one of them per clearing, so you can't be like stacking, a million enclaves in the clearing. So as long as the clearing doesn't already have an enclave, you can stick an enclave in
Yeah.
there. So that's our settle action. Our other action is provoke, and similar to how rally and reconcile were kind of like
Oh.
the peaceful and militant options in Birdsong.
Hmm.
Provoke is kind of the flip side of settling, whereas settling is letting you place peaceful stuff. Provoking is letting you place militant stuff. Provoking, the way that it works is you discard a random card from your hand, except your frog suited cards. So you basically take all of your cards, except your frogs. You randomly discard one.
Mm.
One place that a lot of people are probably going to get a little bit tripped up here, and that I will be putting in big, bold font in the Learn to Play and other places. This is not a card spend. This is not a requirement in order to do this action. If
Hmm.
you don't have any cards, you don't have to like you can still do it.
Right.
You only get rid of something if you actually have something to get rid of.
Right,
Um,
right. It's it's actually sorry. This is a design kind of tangent, but it's one of my
yes.
favorite things in Magic the Gathering, where like the punctuation of like where the comma and the colon
Right.
are becomes really important. Where like, wait, is it after the colon or is it before the colon? Because if it's before, it's a cost, and if it's after, it's just an effect and doesn't matter.
Yeah,
You know,
in
it's
in
like
in root, the way that I notate it, which admittedly I'm sure in one or two places it's a little bit messed up. But the way that I try to notate it at least is that first I use the term spend
Mm,
rather than discard in order
right,
to denote a cost, and then the second is that it's always structured as spend a card to blah blah blah
right,
rather than
right,
just saying discard a random card. You know, that's sort of the way that I differentiate between costs and like triggered effects,
right. Which
essentially.
I think is a tends to be once you like understand that, it tends to be a rather intuitive way of knowing like I am spending this to do this. Like
Yeah, but
it's a
critically, I
cost.
think that this is the first time that a action engages with this distinction, I'm pretty sure. And
Right.
so I will be like triple underlining this in the rule book. Like, you don't if
Do.
you don't have any
Right.
cards, you can still do this action. It's a very important bounce back action if you've been like beaten relentlessly. Like,
Right.
you need to get warriors back on the map.
Right.
So you discard a card. Then you get to either place a militant enclave or flip a peaceful one to militant. So
Mm,
you have to do this if you can. You have to make yourself more militant in some way if you are
mm,
capable of doing so.
right.
Um, so you can place a militant enclave either on the river. You can always just place on the river. This is kind of like your like little homelands. This is
Mm,
where this is where the frogs are. Um, so you can place it somewhere on the river, or you can place it at one of your warriors. So if you have warriors somewhere else that's not the river, you can place a militant enclave there.
right. Which is like it's actually in the couple games that I have played with the frogs, it's a little like not in a bad way, but disconcerting how quickly they can just like start popping these down because you're like, they'll just place
Hmm.
them on the river, and then like they somehow get a guy kind of like all the way up here, and then all of a sudden they're like dropping this
Hmm.
and then recruiting there, and you're like, whoa, wait, how'd that
Yeah.
happen? Oh no, this is
Right.
bad.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of part of the reason why when to give another little peek behind the curtain. A while back, I did kind of a pretty, I believe it was like actually right before the second print and play.
Mm,
I did a fairly large revamp of this faction to simplify it largely.
mm,
And one of the outcomes of that was this random discard as part of this effect.
right.
And let me tell you, the internal testers were like, "Whoa, random discard. What
Rioted.
are you doing? This seems wrong." um, but I don't know. It felt like the appropriate thing to do. The action was even more. It's fine. We haven't even finished talking about the action yet, so
Right.
apologies to those out there trying to follow this. The action was actually even more like powerful back then. I'd say it's a little bit weaker now, but it was just so incredibly powerful of an action that I was like, I need a cost that is like crazy.
Right. That's just like
Like
a
I need a
downside, not even a cost. It's just
right.
like bad things happen to you when you do this.
Exactly.
Things you don't
And
want.
it was really, really important to me, and this was an opinion that over time, became more and more adamant about, which was, you, like, as the diaspora, you need to feel like you are when you are being militant, you are at the mercy of woodland support. Like, if you are being militant,
Mhm.
the woodland is gonna look at you and go, well, why should we
What you
support
doing over
you at
there?
all?
Yeah.
Right. Like, what are you doing? Like, this isn't what you said you were trying to do. So, I really wanted to drive home this sense of like, no, you need to manage your support. Um,
Yeah, and I think that it
so,
is a interesting thing that kind of goes throughout the design of all of the factions that like you have to remember that cards are basically your kind of like influence or your pull with kind of the woodland.
mhm,
So like
right.
when you're discarding cards for an action, it's because people don't like what you're doing usually. It's kind of like the flavor. So
Yeah.
it
You
is
you are spending a favor or burning a connection. You are
right.
doing something that
People not might
generally
like
makes,
that. Yeah.
yeah, people might not have liked that. Exactly. Um, so to actually give this action in a nutshell, you
Right.
discard a card, you flip a enclave to militant or place a new one, and then you get to rally. So you get to place one warrior each militant enclave. So this rally action up
Right.
here, you
Comes
basically just
back.
get to do that. So it's very, very powerful. If you
Mhm.
have 4 militant enclaves out there, you're spending one of your actions to get 4 out there. This is like a cat's level,
Right.
like,
And no,
recruit, but you can do it up to 3
yeah,
times
notably not
after.
limited to once a turn.
Exactly, not limited to once a turn, and you get to add another recruiter
Mm.
onto the map before you
Yes.
recruit. It's like
Yes.
an insane
Add a
action.
recruiter and then recruit as the cats.
Exactly.
Poor
So
poor cats.
yeah. So this is certainly one of those things where I have like thought like, okay, how much power creep is happening here? Um, as is tradition as you're doing expansions.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
but boy, we've done a lot of testing, and
Yeah.
and it seems like it's generally okay.
Yeah, and I
It
think
is
that
def.
that's yeah, that is also one of the things is like it's not necessarily you can have complexity creep without power creep. Like as
Right.
long as
Yep.
it's balanced and there's upsides and downsides to it, like the next step
Yep.
that we're about to talk about, then it's fine.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and so let's talk about the next step. So in evening, the first thing is we have reprisals. So you have to battle at each militant enclave. The ones that you can battle at, that is.
Yes.
You don't have to battle at the ones where there are no enemies.
Right. But still a
Um,
little ouchy.
yep, still a little ouchy. If you like organize your map position in a way to take advantage of this, it can be good, but it might be bad for you in some places. You might not actually want to battle in some of those
Right.
places.
People
So
just come and sit on top of your militant enclave and are like, I'm just gonna sit here.
exactly.
You have to attack me.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, got to battle each one of those, and then we move on to integration. So the integrate step is basically your scoring step.
Mm,
You can choose one suit on the map. Basically, you can choose foxes, mice, or rabbits, and spend a matching card to score 1 point for every peaceful enclave you have in that
mhm.
in those clearings. So if you have 4 peaceful enclaves and fox clearings, and you spend a fox card or a bird card, you can score 4 points.
Right.
Pretty straightforward.
Right. And that
Um,
that is just once a turn, right?
yep, that is
Yeah.
that is just
Just
once a turn. Yeah, you can't score out multiple suits.
right. It's
Um,
it's like
and
the opposite of lizards. Instead of scoring a little
yes,
bit from on everything, it's you get to score kind of a lot, but only
yep,
one.
exactly. And critically, it says this outright, but I'll drive it home. You can't spend the frog suit to score all of your
Oh,
peacefuls. You can't score
sad.
like 8 or 9 or 10 points or
What
whatever.
do you mean I can't score
Um,
12 points?
Yeah. And then finally, you just have a draw step. So you get to draw a card, and then one for every 2 peaceful enclaves.
Mhm,
So this is actually something that only just happened. It was actually every 3 enclaves for quite a while.
mhm,
Going down to 2 seemed kind of crazy, but after we did a bunch of playtesting and I thought through some of the theoreticals about what their card wealth was in the second print and play kind of era. Um, we realized that two is the number, so
yeah.
we're gonna try out 2 for a little
Right.
bit.
It's also you're still, towards the end, but in the middle of the testing where it's like, look, like let's put it at 2 for a month and see what happens. And if it's a broken attack,
Exactly.
we can always put it back to 3. 3 was like
Yeah,
working-ish, but like so if 2
right.
is broken, easy fix. If not,
Easy
cool.
fix. Yeah, we will know. Like we've barely, like, over um the past month, like, barely anything has changed for the frogs. It's like a
Yeah.
few cards,
Yes, it's
and
like slowly solidifying.
yes, they're slowly solidifying. Um, then finally, let's just talk very quickly about their special abilities, and we'll move on
Those
to the next faction.
those berries.
Yep, those berries. So first we have Fears Come True, which I think I've already renamed to Fears Realized, and the one that I'll be pushing. But in any case, it's the same effects. Basically, if somebody battles you or removes one of your peaceful enclaves, so specifically battles a peaceful enclave or removes one,
Mhm,
you are going to flip over a bunch of your other enclaves. So wherever that enemy that hit you is at your peaceful enclaves,
mhm.
those are all going to flip over to militant, and you're going to get a warrior each one of them.
Right.
So
It's
like
like
if the rats attack you, you know, if and there are rats at other peaceful enclaves, all of those other peaceful enclaves are going to be like, whoa, 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 whoa,
Right.
the rats are bad, and they're going to flip over to militant and get some
It's
warriors.
it's the
So,
the like a supercharged going hostile from the vagabond
exactly,
kind of.
exactly, yeah. And critically, like this is the only way that the diaspora can actually make an enclave militant without discarding.
Mm,
So by attacking the diaspora, that actually gives the diaspora like some amount of legitimacy in saying like, no, we do actually need to protect ourselves because we are being attacked.
right.
And so yeah, if you're an enemy attacking them, you're kind of giving you might be giving them an advantage in terms of their militancy if you choose to attack them at their peaceful's. So
Yeah.
um, the flip side of this though is peace talks. This is a way for enemies to get just like how fears come true is a way for enemies to flip enclaves to militant. This is the way that enemies can flip them back over to peaceful. So once per turn, if you're an enemy of the diaspora, um, if you have pieces at a militant enclave, you can spend a card. That's any card. It doesn't have to like match.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a frog card or anything like that. It's just literally any card. And you flip that enclave over to peaceful. So it lets you manipulate that enclave. And then whoever rules the clearing draws a card from the deck or pawn. So this you'll recognize as the same. It's the same kind of structure as Reconcile for the diaspora.
Hmm.
It's just basically there's a card spend involved. And that's basically it. There's just a
Right.
card spend
Right.
involved
And
in
it's
this game.
triggered by an enemy, but
Yep, and it's triggered by an enemy. Yep. And then finally, we have swimmers. If you've played the Riverfolk Company, this will be familiar. It's the same exact ability. You can basically just rivers are paths for you. You know,
right.
you can move on them. You look at adjacent. You treat things as adjacent along them, and so on and so forth. And if you're moving on rivers, you ignore rule. So you can move up and down rivers, ignoring rule.
Mm,
So they've got swimmers just like the others.
right. Which I just honestly I love that it's just the exact same abilities. Like it's they can
Yep, they swim.
they can also
You
do
know.
that. Yeah. It's
Yep, yep. Sometimes an ability just makes sense for another
right.
faction.
And it
Yep.
honestly I love that on maps because it does really let you recontextualize a map and be like, "Oh, wait. I can do I
Hmm.
can do silly things like move from here to here to here and be, bounce across the
Exactly.
entire map." It's
It
it's
it is it is interesting and funny how much over the years I've seen people like when they sit down to play a game of Root for the first time. So many people just immediately are like, "Oh yeah, I can move down rivers."
and you're
And
like,
that's like almost one of the first things I have to I never really bring it up during the teach. Like I say,
mhm.
"Oh, you can move along paths," but like almost inexorably within the first couple rounds, somebody will want to move on a river, and I
Right, they're
feel like,
like,
"Oh, sorry."
you're like, I can
Yeah,
go down this. And like, you can't. He
yeah,
can
nope,
actually, but you
yep,
can't.
yeah, that faction can. Yeah. So that's the diaspora. I won't go through their cards, one by one, but there's
there
plenty
are
of cool effects
there are
in
many
there.
of them. They're fun.
Yep, yep. So cool. So yeah, let's move on to Twilight Council, the big problem child of this whole expansion. The big, the thorn in my side for months and months and months, which I'm finally feeling good about.
It's getting close.
Um, it's getting close. Well, it is the specific place that it is in is where the frogs were somewhere in between the first and second print and play, I'd say. They're still there's still a bunch of stuff that needs to be like jerked into the right place, but like
Right.
the core systems are working, they're functioning, the faction is like doing what it needs to
Right.
do,
Right.
and that is good.
Right.
So
You're like some of the numbers might be a little off, and maybe the order of
yep,
things needs to be changed. But yeah, yeah, it's
yep,
it's it's mostly there.
yep. So, what does this faction want to do? This faction basically wants to, they want to, uh, they want to slow down the war. They want to create a way for the factions and the people of this woodland to adjudicate the war in non-violent or less violent ways, or at the very
Less
least
violent.
in a way that is um, like agreed upon by the woodland in some way, adjudicated by the popular support of the
The
woodland. Some
government said it was okay for us to come and fight you.
Exactly. So basically, trying to create some kind of structure in the midst of this, so basically trying to rebuild
Mm,
a proto government, proto popular government in the war.
right.
The basic way that they're scoring points is that they are consolidating loyalty among different parts of the woodland, the different suits of the woodland. Um, so they are consolidating this loyalty. And broadly, the way that they're doing that is by passing these things called orders. So at a given point in the game, there will be these cards up here. So these are called order cards. Um, and as kind of a one-liner, every time you resolve one of these, you're going to get to score out whatever your loyalty is for the suit of that order. So if you scored out this rabbit, the order in this rabbit assembly here, you would get say 2 points in this case. So like that's
Right.
broadly how they're getting points as they are resolving these orders up here. So these orders are kind of representing that proto government that I'm talking about. So, as we'll talk about as we go through here, the different factions, including the bats throughout the course of this game, will get opportunities to place warriors on these assemblies as influence. And then you will get to basically spend cards in order to do the effect of these orders. So
Right.
you
Which
are accruing and consolidating influence on these, and then resolving the orders to kind of show like, yeah, I am doing the bidding of the woodlands through some sort of, assembly process. People are coming together, they're arguing, they're debating, they're jockeying for influence, and then we have decided that like this is what we're going to do.
yes, that the
Um,
mice are okay with you battling an enemy here.
exactly, exactly. So let's jump in and talk through how these friends work. So the first thing that I'll note is that they have basically one piece type besides their warriors. They have these tokens called the communes,
Mm,
and this is kind of the central piece for thinking about how this influence goes down, thinking about how their warriors get on the map, and a lot of their other mechanics. So this is kind of their central piece. So as I refer to their communes, this is kind of what I'm talking about. Um, in their bird song, basically, they get a passive recruit. So they get to place one warrior at each commune in one suit of their choice. So they can say fox, for example, and then if they had, say, two communes and they're in fox clearings, they would get to place one warrior at each one of them. They could even say frog clearings. That is currently allowed, and they would get, oh boy, a bunch of warriors
it
if they have
it is a
communes
suit.
and a bunch of frog clearings. So it is indeed a suit. So we'll see whether that's too crazy. It's one of those things where it's like, we'll see. Interactions with frog stuff is still, it's very interesting. It creates a lot of weird and cool interactions, which I'm here for, but
Right.
we'll
Makes
see if
like
it's
some
broken.
interesting synergies where you're like, hey, I'm gonna come and hang out and just recruit all over you, and then I'm gonna leave.
Right.
I promise I will leave. And you're like,
Exactly.
will you though?
Yep. Just like, hope so. So yeah, so you basically get a passive recruit. There's a little bounce back here. So like if you don't have any communes on the map, you just get to place one.
Right.
So that's our basically our passive recruit. Then we kind of jump immediately into kind of the meat of their faction. This is like this second birdsong step, even though it's kind of like small here on the board. This is kind of like a huge. This is a huge like part of the faction.
Right.
Um,
The meat.
yes, this is like the meat of the faction in this step right here. So in order to talk about this, I want to talk a little bit more about like the assemblies and kind of how all of this stuff works, because like in order to understand what I'm just about to describe, you kind of need to understand what these assemblies are all about.
Right.
Um, so we have four assemblies here. We have fox, mouse, rabbit, and wild, the wild assembly, where all the creatures can go. And basically, on your turn, whether you're the council, whether you're the Twilight Council or whether you're an enemy faction, particular points on your turn, you're going to get an opportunity to place warriors from your supply onto assemblies. Now, the way that that works is every commune that you have warriors out on the map, is going to let you place a warrior from your supplies influence. So, like,
Mhm.
let's imagine that you're at two communes on the map. Let's say they're both fox communes, for example. That would let you place two of your warriors from your supply in the fox assembly or the wild assembly, or you can split between them. So basically, you're taking a look at where you are on the map with the communes, and that's what you can place onto your assemblies. So the more you are with the bats, basically, the more efficient your ability to influence these assemblies.
Right.
Um, for enemies, you basically just do this at twilight. So at the end of evening, you can basically influence. That's something that you can do. So this is essentially just like a free action that gets
Mhm.
tacked on to the end of your turn.
It's my favorite timing
Um,
in Root, the end of evening.
the end of evening, yes, the end of evening. So you can stick these warriors on these assemblies as influence. And the flip side of this, so this what I've been talking about, this is the influence action, and the flip side of this is the resolve action. So there are basically these two actions that let you interact with these assemblies. You have influence, which lets you place warriors on them, and then resolve, which lets you actually do the things that are on the assembly.
Right.
Um, Resolve basically is a card spend. So you spend a card. And it has to match one of the assemblies where you have influence. So, like, for example, let's say that you now have influence on this fox assembly. You could spend a fox card, you could spend a bird card, just standard card spend that
Right.
matches the assembly that you want to resolve. Um, you're gonna basically get to do the order on it. So we'll kind of talk through what these mean in a second, but like you'd
Right.
get to do the thing in the assembly.
Right. And there's a handy dandy reminder card over here also.
Yep. So basically the way that it's laid out is for the assemblies themselves, we just kind of have these like big chunky cards with, 30-point text on them so that they can be read like easily across the
From across the
table.
table,
They'll
yeah.
all exactly, they'll have like unique art. Like we basically want like the card here needs to be the like big obvious thing that everybody can read.
Right.
And then you'll just have like a little aid card that says like what that does exactly that you
Right.
can refer to.
Yes, this is the billboard,
Um,
yeah.
Yep, this is the billboard exactly. And if you want to read the fine print, you have your own card in front of you. Um, you get to do this thing, and we'll talk about these effects in a little bit. But you basically get to do the thing. Um, then you kind of get to influence the assembly. That's the wrong word. You get to change things in the assembly up a little bit.
Muck it up, yeah.
If you yeah, muck it up a little bit. So first of all, if you have the most influence in that assembly, you can replace this order with a new one. You basically just get to say, I don't like disarm, for example. I want it to be a punish instead. So if you have the most warriors in that assembly, you can just freely choose. There's going to be this stack of orders here. You can freely choose one and just stick it there. There's only three of these. And there's just a bunch of duplicates.
Mhm.
Um, but you get to choose a new one if you want it. Um, After that, you are going to shift the loyalty of the council. So generally, if you're the council, you're going to be wanting to shift your loyalty up, and if you are an enemy, you're going to be wanting to shift it down. This depends upon how much influence you have on the assembly. So if you just had one, you're just going to be shifting it one. If you have more, you shift it more. So
Right.
your influence basically determines how much you are shifting this loyalty around on this track. So the more influential you are, the more ability you have to kind of muck with the loyalty of these different constituencies in the woodland. Muck with that
Yeah.
in
I,
the
I, I,
council's
I
loyalty.
will just point out here for the people who are gonna print this out and play it that this is a super important thing to actually interact with because if there are parts of Root that you can kind of just ignore and you're like, whatever, that rat over there will just blow up a bunch of people and it's not going to be any problem. But if you don't like interact with this, like, or if one or more people at the table just stop interacting with this, very quickly, it can get out of hand where they because the Twilight Council can add a lot more easily than other people. So
Yeah, they do have this like natural edge in terms of getting influence on here and
Right.
resolving. So yeah,
R-
you do need to be like actively engaged.
which
Yeah,
is I think really good design. It's like you can't just ignore them. You have to become part of the council.
exactly. Yeah, you have to like, maybe like one of the sort of like points of like the faction that is going to least want to interact with the council is probably the rats because they want clearings that are fully empty of pieces.
Right.
And so certainly like that's an interaction that we are still like fully working out at this point. Because the rats are like the militants. They're like
Right.
the most aggressive, the most just like spit in your face
Right.
faction there is.
I have to say I was
Um,
not particularly happy about it as birds last night either.
yes, yes, yes. Yeah, birds also are going to have a tough time, but for kind of a different reason. The rats are kind of anti-bats because they want to clear
Right, they want to clear it
clearings
all
out
out, yeah.
completely. And with birds, it's more, oh boy, my warriors and my cards are like
So important.
super valuable to me, like extraordinarily valuable to me. So,
Like, I'm
so
just
yeah,
not gonna do that.
certainly, yeah. So like certainly the rats in the Eyrie right now are they're the most sad. Oh, the rats maybe not sad. Certainly the Erie are going to be sad right now.
Yeah.
So note that Erie players who are playing against the bats in their current state. Um, so to finish this up, so you can replace the order if you have the most influence. You're shifting this loyalty around based on your influence, and then you're pulling some of your influence off. So the way that this works is a critical thing about these orders is you can only target players that have equal or less influence than you have on that assembly. So like right now, let's say that you're the bats. Um, you can target anybody. You have the most influence on this assembly. Cool. Nobody else has more than you. You have carte blanche. But if you only had one influence here, you wouldn't be able to target the frogs. They are
Right.
more influential than you here. And so they're just like, sorry, like the woodland is like, sorry, why should we allow you to do that? Like, you haven't convinced us basically that
Yes.
you should be allowed to do this.
Government says no.
Um, yes, the woodland says no. When you're removing your influence, the way that it works is whoever you targeted, so like let's say that you're the bats and you targeted the frogs, you're going to remove influence equal to theirs. So they have two, you have an equal amount, you're going to remove all of your influence. So like the closer that opponent is to you and their influence, the more you're going to have to like jettison basically.
Right.
Um, so
Alternatively, if someone isn't putting stuff on there, you can just freely target them, and
exactly.
I just get to
Yes.
keep all my influence on here. This is great.
Yeah, this is kind of the like a lot of this will kind of like click into place when I talk a little bit about more about communes themselves.
Mm,
But like this is kind of the way that the faction punishes highly aggressive militant factions.
right.
Because as we'll talk about in a little bit, if you are too aggressive at communes, your influence is going to get stripped off of these. So this is kind of the way that the faction models the sense of highly aggressive versus less aggressive factions is by looking at this influence. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Um, so to summarize, resolve is just spend a card matching the assembly, do the thing, you can replace the order if you want. You're going to shift loyalty around, and then you're going to remove some influence based on who you targeted. So, poof, a lot, right? Yeah,
Mm.
that's a lot. That's a big mouthful. The nice thing is, this is one of those things where it is a lot to explain, but I don't know. I think in my, I mean, I'm super biased here, but um, like a couple rounds around, and I think this is gets pretty intuitive. It's just like, yeah, I can target people with less influence than me. I strip equal to the difference, and I get to do the thing. Like
Right.
most of it, it feels pretty intuitive to me. But I'm definitely biased here.
It also helps that
Um,
all of a sudden you're like, okay, cool. Now I have more actions I can do on my turn. If you're one of those factions that's like action starved, like cats or lizards, where you're like,
yeah,
okay, I do have to
this
like spend
is
a card and some warriors, but I get to do more actions now.
Yeah, this is a
Mm.
big, big boon to action restricted factions. Like giving the lizard, like to spoil one of these, punish lets you battle. So giving the lizards a battle that they can just do is like, okay,
So
now we're
I'm
talking.
here for it.
Yeah. So let's actually let's go through these. So we have three orders. And they're all pretty straightforward, really. The first one is disarm, which is basically just you get to replace an enemy warriors with yours. So you're
Whew.
saying, yeah, you need to lay down arms. I'm the only one who actually has the right to like enforce anything around here. So you go home. I'm gonna take charge here. Then we have expel. Expel is basically a forced move. So this is outside of things like false orders and exiles and partisans deck,
Mm,
and I think a hireling. This is the only like built-in like forced enemy move
mm,
that can happen a lot in Root. So this is you just force an enemy to move uh, from wherever you are,
mm.
and it's one warrior for each piece you have there. So if you have like a token warrior, you can say, okay, you're gonna have to move two warriors out of there.
Yeah. We
And you dictate everything. So
yeah,
you choose where they go. You ignore rule.
we were
It's
ping-ponging
just
some moles around yesterday that were being quite annoying. We're like, "All right, I'm going to shove it towards you and then you shove it up towards me and then I'll attack them." It's like
yep,
bouncing them
yep.
around, making them useless.
Yeah, these are like fundamentally what these orders are. Like the thing that these orders do is that they are more policing options for the table.
Mm,
So like as we'll talk about, um because this faction penalizes people for being aggressive where they are,
mm,
they need to give some mechanism for the table to police. Like they basically are stripping out a particular they are disincentivizing battling in certain ways,
mm.
and so they need to give more options to the table. They giveth and they taketh away, basically.
Yeah.
um so um yeah, this thing right here, this resolve up to once per assembly, this is the big thing. Everything else after that is all really, really straightforward. But this is kind of the big chunk of the faction. And this is indeed the most complex of the three. One of the most complex factions in Root. This is definitely on the level of, badgers, lizards. Frogs, I would say, moderate complexity. Twilight Council, high complexity. And then the knaves that we'll get to, medium low, lower end of medium.
Mm,
I wouldn't quite say like low. It's definitely not Corvid's level, for
right.
example, but lower end of medium, I'd say. So we're done with Birdsong. Uh, Going on to Daylight. Pretty simple. This is a lizard cult like reveal action step. Most of these should fly by pretty easily. Fly by, haha, the first action, fly.
Ah.
Um, this is kind of like the opposite of the gather move that the diaspora has. This
Mm,
is basically just you choose a matching clearing, a clearing matching the card that you revealed. You can move out of it any number of
right.
times.
It's
So just you move
disperse.
out of it. Yep, disperse. Exactly. It disperses that from the clearing. Battle in a matching clearing. Recruit, place a warrior in a matching clearing. One rider on this. You lose a loyalty matching that clearing if it doesn't have a commune in it. So you can't just recruit like willy-nilly like the lizards can. There is a little bit of a restriction, but especially in the early game, it's pretty muted because your loyalty starts like
Right. It can only go
close
so
to the
low.
bottom
Yeah.
of the track. So it's more of a penalty if you're like, you've boosted loyalty up and you're like, I want to recruit a bunch of times in like a clearing that I don't have a commune
Right.
in. And then finally we have Reunite, which is basically just the commune placement action.
Mm,
So place a commune in a matching clearing, you rule without one.
right.
So
Easy
pretty
peasy.
straightforward, just once per clearing, stick it, stick it in there if you roll it.
Mm,
Then we go into evening, you take all of your revealed cards back, you can craft using communes, you can influence. So this is that thing that I talked about before, where you're checking where you are with communes. And for the bats, it's easy. It's just where do you have communes?
Right.
That's how much influence you're getting. You can do this a second time. However, if you do that, you skip your whole draw. So this is like a Corvids. If you've played the Corvids, this is a Corvids exert, basically, as you can
Right.
do this a second time if you skip your draw. And then you draw. So you get to draw one card plus one for every loyalty track that is at least at this space.
Mm.
Um, this says support right now. It's meant to say loyalty. That'll be fixed before this actually goes out. Because we're filming this before the release
Oh,
by
what?
a little while. So, oh my god.
Just a few days.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, just a little bit. Cool. So that's our action flow. So let's just talk about our abilities then. Um, Realistically, this should actually be in reverse order. So I'm gonna go kind of from right to left here. Another thing that I'll probably just switch before I actually release this.
Right. Might as
So
well.
Twilight. At the end of evening, an enemy may influence or resolve. So I already kind of alluded to this before. If you're an enemy of the council, you can just do this stuff. You can do one of these things at the end of your evening. You can either place warriors from your supply onto the assemblies, or you can resolve an assembly. Then we have disruption. Whenever you remove a commune, the council discards a random card. This is
Mm,
basically like the lizard
right.
garden removal. It's
Their
just you
punitive
discard a
mechanism.
random
Yeah.
card. Yep, punitive mechanism. And then finally we have shame, which kind of this is kind of a keystone thing that ties a lot of this together. Maybe this is even something I'm still trying to learn how to like move through the explanation of this faction because
Right.
so much of this stuff is only like a lot of the core systems here are stable at this point, but they've only been really stable for 2 or 3 weeks. So I'm
Right.
still kind of like learning how to like navigate through the flow of this whole thing. So shame. Basically, each time a player removes a commune or enemy pieces at a commune, they remove all of their matching influence. So, like, if they're removing something in a fox clearing, they're going to be removing all of their fox influence and all of their wild influence.
Yeah. It's
So, all of their
rough.
influence that they've been accruing, it just all goes away in one fell swoop. So, you really need to like time, if you've been building up in Fox, like you might not want to like fight at a Fox commune.
Maybe we
If
go
you are if
somewhere
you are
else.
in yeah, if you are intent on keeping that influence, you don't want to do that. The exception to this is first of all, of course, if you're defending, you're the defender. Why would the council get mad at you for defending
Right.
yourself? Um, or if you're resolving an order. So, like, if you're resolving one of these cards, you have been authorized by the council and by proxy the people of this woodland to punish the
To
the
dole out
aggressors
justice.
and
Yes.
yes, to dole out justice exactly. So you are once again exempt. But broadly, if you're going and punching people in the face at communes, you are getting punished by your influence
Yeah,
getting
I
removed.
actually it's funny because I played against these guys yesterday and totally missed these last 3 or 4 words or resolving an
Mhm.
order, and I
Sure.
probably would have been a little bit more aggressive about throwing stuff into the assembly to be like, oh, now I can go and fight them at their own
Yep.
stuff and not lose influence. Oh, that's
Yep.
better. Yeah, I just totally missed
Yeah,
that.
and yeah, and this is kind of like this is one of those things where uh yeah, over time figuring out how to get these clauses in like the right place where they get noticed and
Right,
breaking
like,
things up
do
in
I
a way that
bold
makes
it? Do
sense.
I italicize it?
Yes.
Do I put it at the beginning? Do I put it at the end?
Yeah, exactly. What's all the sentence structures? Where do the commas go? Yeah, just like all of those things are
It's
still very
it's
rough.
it's a joke amongst some of the like fan content people that the final boss of root fan content is formatting.
Yes,
It's just like
exactly, exactly. So yeah, so that's the Twilight Council. Yeah, pretty happy with where they're at. To speak a little bit more about a little bit more about the context for a really long time. So for the first and second print and plays, and like even in their throughout their whole conception up until about a month ago,
Mm,
they basically used some sort of card game based resolution system. So like
mm,
their conceit was always basically um model non-violent and less violent ways of like adjudicating the war
mm,
through cards and like soft power in some way.
right.
And so for a long time this was basically modeled through some kind of like, okay, we've begun an assembly, you like reveal some cards from your hand and
Mm,
the other player reveals some cards, and like this had seen like
right.
just
It's
a
like,
billion
okay, we're gonna play a
different like
mini game
takes.
now, and
Yeah,
then
right.
based on the results of that, yeah.
Right. And so basically like this system is like it's fundamentally engaging with some of the same ideas that that system was thinking about. Like
Hmm.
there is still a focus um, Uh, and cards, like you can't resolve any of these orders unless you spend a matching card. It engages with ideas about soft power, like you have to actually be engaging with the council and their communes in
Right,
order
and
to
you
get
can't be
influence down in the
fighting
first
near
place.
them, and yeah, yeah, it's
Right.
definitely some.
Um, they still fundamentally are concerned about like peace and war. Like you are penalized for fighting near them, just like in previous PNPs. But it's all like all of these themes are just completely recontextualized in a different assembly system, basically. So it's
Right.
still touching on all of those ideas. It's flipped it on its head in a way where we're no longer playing
Hmm.
a card game. Like at one point the loving name that we had for it was bat poker, essentially. We're no longer playing bat poker, we're playing
Uh,
bat
we could
auction
do
kind of now.
Balatro, the root faction.
Exactly. So, and I won't get into like all of the reasons why I made that transition, but the first thing that I will note is that just on a pure word count basis, um this version has like 60 to 70% of the words that
The other one did.
those
Oh
versions did, basically. Like
gosh.
this version is high complexity.
Yeah.
Those versions were high
Just
complexity. They
just
were
absurd. Yeah.
way too complicated. And not only were they complicated, but they were complicated in a way that obfuscated a lot of the interesting interactions, because so much of it was happening just like in the brains of players who were like looking at their hands and going, I'm going to be so cool when I do this, but nobody else at the table had any idea of
Right.
just like, oh, sure, that player was like like it is so hard to
Right.
recognize
It's like the
when
thing that you
another
talk
play
about at the end of the game where you're like, hey, remember on turn 3 when we did that? I made a really cool move and no one noticed. And you're like,
exactly, and nobody noticed. Yeah,
cool,
exactly.
I
It's
guess.
like,
I'm
yeah,
glad for you.
yeah. So like this system is like it's a lot simpler, and it actually like surfaces the fact that people are doing
Right,
things,
and it also
which
gets to
is
you can like
good.
see it on the board over
Right.
there. You're like, oh no, they have a lot of guys in the punish one. We should
Right.
be careful about where they
Yeah.
are. They have an extra attack
So
action. Holy schmoly. Yeah.
right. So like just on very fundamental. It's like this is one of those things where you get so attached to this like specific way of just like, oh, wouldn't it be cool? It's the wouldn't it be cool if, and then you just get out on this tangent for such a long time
Yep.
and you're just lost.
Yeah, it's
So
actually it's one of the best advice from I don't know if you've ever followed Mark Rosewaters, the head designer for Magic the
mhm.
Gathering. And it's one of the
Yeah, I love
things where
that
he's
guy.
like don't just do something just because you can. That's not
Yep.
a good enough
Yeah.
reason to design something to show, hey, look, we can do this. You're like, no, no,
Yep.
don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And in this case, the it's kind of a place where so often thinking naturalistically about like what specific currencies in a game represent is often a good starting point. So,
Hmm.
like, one of my starting points back in the day was, okay, well, yeah, cards are the soft power currency in Root. So, like, that is the natural place to start thinking of when you're thinking about, hey, I want to make a soft power faction, right?
Yeah,
Like,
like a,
this
yeah.
is
How
this
can I
is
make a
this
system that uses that? Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's kind of that's a big reason why that darling was so hard to
Right, right.
get rid of, which was I basically convinced myself. I was like, there has to be a way. Like, given given what this means in the world of Root,
Right,
like there should be a way to make this work.
right.
And the main problem here, I'm saying I wouldn't get too into it, and now I'm getting into it. Um, the main problem basically was um there's just a lot of different factions in Root that have a lot of different priorities.
Right.
And in order to create a system that smoothly integrates the incentives of all of those different factions in a way that is almost kind of counter, like in some ways, completely counter to the intuitions of some of those factions, um, it is hard, and if you are too stuck on a very specific way of squaring that circle, you're gonna fail, basically.
Right,
And
right.
so basically what started to happen was there was this card system, like so much weight was placed on the hand, essentially.
Hmm.
So much was placed on the hand that there had to be this whole other edifice
Hmm.
of rules kind of built on top of that to say, okay, well, you can play the card game, but you can also kind of like get out of the card game in this specific
Right.
way. And that
Right, because they're
involves so
just
many more
right.
rules. And it just became a mess,
Right,
basically.
because
And so,
there's
yeah,
factions, like rats where like I have one card. I
right,
can't play a card game
exactly.
with my one card or you but
Right.
and then you have the wood the lizards over there with their giant hand. So
Exactly, exactly. And so you have to figure out a way to make the soft power game in a way that engages both with warrior and card currencies in a way
right.
that feels um unique and feels like the faction is doing what it wants to do. That the council is meeting its conceit, but also in a way that doesn't feel just like utterly oppressive to those hyper aggressive factions.
Right,
So
right.
you can't just make a faction that's like, okay, now if you're playing this aggressive faction, you're just gonna lose the game
Right.
and be sad
You just
now.
can't
You just
interact
can't
with me
win.
in any
Yeah,
meaningful way. Yeah.
exactly. So, cool. With all that said, let's jump over to the knaves. And this one will be this is be pretty easy.
Love
So
it.
the knaves. The first thing I'll say, which will probably be surprising to people who are familiar with the previous print plays, there's only one captain now.
Oh,
Surprise!
see, I didn't even know
Um,
that. Because
yes.
I played against the Knaves like maybe a month ago, and the last night we played with the Twilight Council and talked about them, but I wasn't up on the Knaves, and I was like, I'm sure they haven't changed that much. It's fine.
Yeah. In many, so they haven't changed nearly as dramatically as the bats, but the change from three captains to one, definitely a pretty big change.
Hmm.
Um, a little bit of context is basically the knaves were working great for a long time for the knaves. The knaves were fun to play, but they were terrible to and horrible and tedious to play against.
Right.
Um, and by and large, this was a result of the three captain system. Um, the knaves were first of all too able to be everywhere,
Hmm.
too able to exert considerable force everywhere, and too um too able to bounce back from their losses in a way that was not um other players were not eager at all to
Right.
engage with.
Right. There's like this weird
So
juggling thing where it's like, okay, I'll just like bounce this guy in and then this guy out, and you're like, wait, huh? What? I
exactly,
thought I just
yeah.
policed you. What's happening?
Exactly. And so like again, this was one of those situations where the conceit of the faction as a faction that takes hostages, Robin Hood cosplayers, if you believe their own mythos, the good mythos about them. They're still doing this thing where they're taking warriors hostages. They're trying to get the other factions to, you know, either give them cash or like bow down, bend the knee to them in certain ways.
Right.
They're trying to consolidate, financial or political power basically by trying to grind these war machines down by taking their warriors hostages. All of that stuff, all the same. They're still using vagabonds as their captain. They're still using items. All of this is the same. It's just they don't have three anymore. It's just one.
Just one, yeah.
Um, let's talk a little bit about the knaves and what they do. So fundamentally, as I said before, the knaves are getting points by taking hostages of other factions. So they are fighting other factions, and as they fight other factions, they are taking these warriors hostage. That's kind of fundamentally how they are getting points.
Mhm.
The more warriors you have of each enemy faction, the more points you are getting to score. Um, the fundamental pieces of the knaves, you've got your captain. So, for example, we've got this like nice little boar here, this boar captain. If you're playing the jailer, and you can use any vagabond pieces you have. There is a matching there's a matching captain for.
Mhm.
So in this expansion, we're including three new captains, which will also have vagabond versions. We have the jailer, gladiator, and the cheat. Names not final, but they feel pretty good. Um, and of course, everything not final. But names definitely so. So you basically will choose one of these captains at the start of the game, and this is kind of your this is like your engine. This is like the first part of your engine. Your captain is going to be the fundamental piece that like gets your engine going. It's going to give you you're going to have a lot of actions at it. You can almost think about it like a sort of warlord. It feels a little bit like the warlord from the Lord of the Hundreds.
Mhm.
um, but I liken this faction. It's almost like imagine Lord of the Hundreds, but they're actually the WA. Like
Right.
they're actually rather than just thinking about it of just like, oh, there's this one piece that's like really scary and like it's roaming around and doing all this stuff. In the case of the knaves, your captain is more of a support role than
Right.
your warrior is in the Lord of the Hundreds.
Right.
And you're basically going to be spreading out your lackeys around it, the map. You're going to be placing dens where you're hiding out around the map. And so basically, the captain is kind of like the person who's like setting all of that in motion. And they will be kind of scary. They will
Right.
definitely be like a scary force, but nowhere near to the extent that the warlord is.
Yeah, they're almost like the mob boss.
Yeah, they're like the mob boss, exactly. Let's talk a little bit about how their turn works. Um, so beyond their captain, their fundamental piece are these buildings called dens. These dens basically they're double-sided, with really excellent placeholder art
Just
here. Like,
just the
look at this,
best
just
of the best of the best,
amazing
cream of the
art
crop.
here. Um, and so these dens basically are they are places that will like let you do actions. They're going to give you card draw. They're going to give you item draw. They're good for you. And so as you place these around the map, they're either going to be hidden or exposed. The first step of Birdsong is basically going to be flipping these dens over to one of those sides. So basically, everywhere the enemies rule you, you're going to be flipping those dens over to exposed. And everywhere that's not ruled by enemies, you're going to be flipping them over to hidden. So this is basically the sense of like, yeah, your enemies are scoping out like where your hideouts are.
Mm.
You've got your dens over here. They've got a lot of warriors like looking around and patrolling, and so they've exposed your den basically.
What's in that over there? Yeah.
What's in that over there exactly? So you're going to be flipping these dens over. Then you get to craft with hidden dens. So any hidden dens you have after that step, you can craft with those.
Mm.
Um, critically, they basically have what is called um, disdain for trade on the Erie. They basically have disdain for trade. It's called knaves come first here. When they craft items, they only get 1 point. So, like the Erie, they only get 1 point for crafting
Mm.
items. And items that you craft go in your item bag. So I will
Mm.
introduce the final like core element of this faction, which is their item bag. So unlike the Vagabond, which just has a huge satchel of items that they can kind of pick and choose from turn over turn, the knaves have more of a random draw, basically. So over the course of the game, they're basically going to be spending these items to take more actions, and then near the end of the turn, they're going to be drawing some items out of their bag.
Right.
So as you craft more items, you're just going to be sticking those in your bag.
I love me a bag builder.
Um, Yeah, a little bag builder. It used to be a lot like this is another element. So like basically there are two main elements of this faction that like the priorities of like where the weight of like what the faction cares about and where the rules are being spent on the faction.
Mm.
There are two places where it's kind of shifted over time. The first place, as we already talked about, is the captains going down from three captains to one.
Mm.
And then the second place is like exactly how intricate and like bespoke are like the bag building mechanics
Right.
in the faction. And at this point, it's pretty straightforward. It's basically just like you can add like you start with a few items, you can add items to your bag with craft, you can remove them when you feel like it. And
Right.
like that's pretty much it. There's nothing crazy going on here.
Mm.
This is not a bag building faction, fundamentally because at a certain point there was a realization of just like the thing about bag building games is that they're not multiplayer. It's almost kind of the same feeling that I was getting with Bat Poker when I was talking about
Mm.
the Twilight Council. When you're bag building, it's like, okay, oh, I'm doing all my bag building stuff, but it's in a
Right.
bag, and so it's like fundamentally
Right.
out of
Unless
view from
right,
other
and unless
players.
that's
So,
like the entire crux of the entire game, like Quacks of Quedlinburg, yeah, you can't
right,
just be like, "Oh, I have a 4 in 2 chance," and people are like, "Wait, I don't
right,
how does your
exactly.
faction work again?" You're like,
Exactly. And so this is another place where I was just like, this is silly. There's too much in like there's I'm hiding. I'm taking a part of this faction and going like, "Ooh, it's behind a curtain. Wouldn't all of the rest of you love to know what's going on behind this curtain?" And so at this point it's just like very stripped down.
mm,
You basically start with your captain has a few items and you start with the ruin items and then you're going to be adding two or three items maybe over the course of the game and removing a few. It
right.
doesn't really change that much, but it is an important source of variance turn over turn.
Hmm.
Like I do want to inject that sense of like, oh, I got these items. Like, how am I going to use these items with this map state and my current priorities to like accomplish what I'm
Right.
going to
And it kind of
accomplish? So
helps your churn a little bit, like
exactly. Yeah,
what you
it
can
helps your
actually do.
churn and it gives the faction enough actions without it becoming like either rote or too like, oh, they can do anything.
Right.
They can be anywhere, which was again kind of the problem with the three captain
Right.
version.
Well, and the
Um
problem with Vagabond.
and the problem with that yes, and the problem with that. Going on to daylight. Um, so your captain can take up to three actions, along with any items that it spends is an action. So technically up to six, but it gets three baseline, and then you
Mm.
can also spend items. Pretty simple here. We got to move. We got to battle. We got place a warrior,
Boom, boom,
and then
boom.
finally we have place a hidden den at your captain or flip an exposed den at your captain to hidden. So
Mm.
basically just either plunk a hidden one down or flip one over. So
Right.
pretty straightforward there in terms of actions. Um, as I said before, you can also use your items to take more actions. This is basically just whenever you use an action, you either put it back in the bag, or if you feel like it, you can just remove it. If you're like, I don't ever want to see that item again, you can just bop it out of the game.
I never want to recruit ever again.
Yes, exactly. So the items are they hew pretty close to the actions that I've already talked about. A few of them have some bonuses though. So
Mhm.
the boot, it's a move, but you can move your captain twice. Cool. Bag, it's a move, but you basically get to teleport between dens. So if
Mm.
you're at a den, you can just move to another den. You basically you get your minions to put you in
I
a
see.
potato sack
Right.
and carry you around, and the warriors are like, "What's in that potato sack?" And they're like,
Nothing.
"Potatoes," and they're like,
Nothing at
"Cool,
all.
nothing to see here."
You don't
Um,
need to see our identification.
yes, exactly. Swords of Battle, Hammer is crafting just like Vagabonds. T is the recruit action, just place a warrior.
Mm.
Coins is the bribe action, the place a hidden den or flip one to exposed.
Right.
And then Crossbow is kind of the trickiest, funniest one. Crossbow is basically you're battling, but you flip the dice, so you're hitting with the lower die,
Mm.
but you don't take any rolled hits. So, like if you roll a 3-2, for example, you
Right.
would deal 2 hits, and you don't take any hits.
Right. Which
So,
actually, as I read it, I was like, well, that's very clever. Why haven't I thought of doing that in any of the things I've done?
well, it took like this is like the crossbow has been one of the hardest items to
Mm.
figure out like what to do with, because like the original vagabond effect was just like removing a piece.
Right.
But like you kind of like if you're just removing a piece, that's not really something that this faction cares about that much because they care about taking hostages.
Right. It
And
also
like
has like
unless it's fair,
some it's like a weird rules zone of like I'm just gonna remove this piece. It like doesn't count for like triggering a lot of things. It doesn't trigger ambushes. It doesn't trigger the lizards going into getting turning into
yeah,
agolite. Like it's like doesn't do anything. You're like, oh man, that's really annoying
yeah,
rules wise. Actually, that's not a
yeah.
battle.
Yeah, I like to be honest, like if I went back to the Vagabonds
Right.
and like had a chance to redevelop it, I would honestly probably just make this the
Right. That
effect.
this is how it would
Um,
work. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, because it just slots in a little bit more cleanly in with some of the reactions of other
Right.
factions. It's a little bit more complicated in terms of like number of words, but it's
Right.
less complicated in terms of like adjudicating
Right. And
interactions.
interacting with all of the other rules.
Exactly. Um, So, yeah, you can use your actions. Use your items for actions. Then we go on to acting with your hidden dens. So as I said before, your dens can either be hidden or exposed, and so only your hidden dens can do actions. So you'll have a bunch of dens out. Probably only like 2 or 3 of these are going to be hidden at a given
Mhm.
time. Maybe 4
You're
if you're lucky.
if you're
But yeah,
really lucky, yeah.
yeah, if you're really lucky. And these are basically just the same as the captain's first 3 actions. You get to move from them, you can battle at them, you can recruit at them. Easy. Oh my gosh, so much easier than the council. Holy crap. Mhm. And that's your daylight. So your captain acts, your hidden dens act. Um, we go on to our evening. First thing is expand. So expand is basically just like this is a way. This is a way for you to expand. It's kind of a core way that you can kind of burst, put out a bunch more dens.
Right.
So expand basically says any number of times you can flip a den to exposed to place a hidden den at a knave warrior. So basically, you just flip over one of your hidden dens, and then wherever you have a warrior,
Mhm.
you can place a hidden den.
Right.
Now critically, one thing that I'll point out is that in the berry for dens,
Mhm.
up here in Dens of Scum and Villainy, this does say clearings can only have one den. So even though these are buildings, these are much like eerie roosts. You can only
Mhm.
have one of these dens per clearing. So just take note of that. Then we go on to ransoming. Now we get our points for hostages.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit more about hostages, since we kind of alluded to it before, but we didn't actually like really describe it. So hostages basically are whenever you're attacking in battle, you can just take defending warriors that you hit as hostages. So
Mhm.
if you hit 2 frogs, you can take those 2 frogs.
Mhm.
The only restrictions here are if you have no dens on the map, you can't do it. So this is basically saying like if you have nowhere to like put the hostages,
Right.
you can't take them.
Got to put them
Um,
somewhere.
You gotta put them somewhere. You gotta send them off to somewhere where they can't be found.
Right.
And then the second restriction is if there are no more remaining attackers. So if you don't have any pieces, any
Right.
attacking pieces left
Any
in the
dudes to
clearing.
take them and put them in the den.
Exactly. So basically, you need people to take them and somewhere for them to go. Is basically
Right, right.
those restrictions. Um, so yeah, you can, but otherwise, you can have any number of hostages. There's no like limit on them, and just like the number of hostages that you have.
Mhm.
Um, we get to ransoming hostages. So for each enemy, you're just going to score based on how many hostages you have. So if you only have one, you get 0 points, and so on and so forth. You are counting this for each faction, so you are kind of incentivized to spread between multiple factions, and not just like stack a bajillion of one person's.
Right, since you're
Uh,
only getting 3 for getting, all the way up to 7.
7 rather than a point each for it's generally these numbers probably even need to be tuned a little bit more, but that's the broad thing going on here is
Right,
that
right,
it's generally harder to squeeze out more points the higher you go on a single faction.
right.
Um, Cool. And then we release hostages. So there's a little bit of a hostage drip back
Mm,
if you have a lot of them. So this says if you scored more points than your number of dens on the map, you have to return one hostage for each point in excess. So this is actually this is a little bit hard to trigger. Like
mm,
if you have two dens out there on the map and you're scoring 3 or more points, like you're going to be returning hostages, for example.
right,
But basically, there just needs to be some kind of wall that you can hit here that
right,
depends on your
right. And
count.
and that's
Um,
points total or points.
yep, just points
Right,
total.
right,
Yep. So like if you scored 3 points and you have two dens, you'll return one hostage.
right, right.
So so there's a little bit of a drip back there. Then, and this may strike people as very funny at first, and it may be funny. Maybe this rule is wrong. Maybe it will be gone soon. But this is just my intuition right now. At the end of release hostages, it says then you may remove any number of hostages, and so
Mm,
you may wonder like why. Why would I do that? Why would
right.
I
Why would I
possibly
nerf my own scoring?
remove
Right.
the thing that's scoring points? The reason is because in Knave's games, a thing that I think is true about I'm not positive yet, but a thing that I really think is true about this faction, and that at the very least I want to
Explore.
engage
Yeah.
within this faction, is this sense of when I can take the heat from the other factions and when I can't.
Mhm.
And if you have hostages of another faction, they can go rescue those hostages and get those hostages back on the map,
Right.
which means that they're going to want to rescue those hostages. And so if you have a bunch of hostages of somebody who is like on top of you and is about to punch you really hard, you might want to consider removing some of your
Right. You're
hostages
like, "You know what? Maybe I
because
give these back to you and you just don't come punch me." How about that?
exactly. And it's potentially good for you like in this case you were removing those hostages
Mhm.
rather than them punching you and them getting those hostages back onto the map. And
Right.
so like you are saying I am actually like fully, I'm I'm completing the circle here
Right.
on this battle that I did a little while
You
ago.
take these
Yeah, I'm
back.
actually gonna remove these, and you
Right.
can have these back,
Right.
and take the heat off myself rather than you just coming over, punching me, and getting them up back on
Right,
the map. So
right.
that's kind of this is a pretty new rule, but like I've seen enough games where like the knaves have taken a bunch of hostages and scored some points, and then it's like, oh god, that enemy now the only thing they're going to do is absolutely steamroll
Right.
everything that I have on the map now.
Right.
Um,
Right. And there's
so
also some, you get to one point where you're like, okay, I'm gonna make like 6 or 8 points, but I don't need that many points. So let's just maybe take the heat off of me a little bit, and I can just skate over the finish line as opposed to totally obliterating the finish line. Like I just need to
yeah, well, I mean,
pass
root
30.
like a big part of root is heat management, right?
Right.
That's like you don't want to be. the obvious leader in a way that other people can gang up on you. You
Right.
know, this, as in any multiplayer conflict game, the specter of punch the leader looms large in thinking about design decisions.
Right.
And so the question always comes down to, what are the tools that players have to punch the leader, and what are the tools that the leader has to mitigate
Right. And
that
kind of
that punching, you know.
release the steam also of being like, I'm not the
Exactly,
leader. I don't know what you're
release
talking
steam.
about.
Yeah, you know, and even just purely from a perspective of like just an incentives perspective here
Right.
of like manipulating table incentives of just like, okay, well, yes, I am the leader. But I'm going to take it down from I am the leader and you punching me is going to give you so much to I am the leader and punching me is
Right.
not really going to give you much at
Right. I mean,
all.
you'll
So
police
like
me, I guess, a little
the
bit,
police
but
me, I
you
guess,
don't get
little
warriors out of it on the
yeah.
map.
Yep. Yeah, so releasing hostages. And then finally we just have some drawing. So
Right.
you get to draw one card, you get to draw one item from your bag. And then for every one of these like card slash, great placeholder image here is icon here as well. For every one of these icons, you get to draw a card or an item.
Yeah.
So um, if you draw more items than you have slots, you just you put them back in your bag or you remove them. You basically get to curate your items.
Right. Notably, is this is an extra slot for items
This
also,
this
or
no, this is just an extra item draw. Yep.
oh, an extra item draw?
Yep, you only ever have 3 item slots, and this is just saying you draw 1 card, 1 item, and then you can choose, to draw an extra card or item
That
for
symbol
each one of
makes total sense, 100% sense, because you're doing both of those things. Yes.
yeah.
My
That being
brain
said,
just
it's
churning.
also bad, like, anytime a slash gets involved, you wanna, like, start sweating.
You're like, oh
Like,
no.
we're getting into your game territory here in terms of icon complexity.
Right, right.
It was actually funny. This reminds me of a period of time in Root, the base game
Hmm.
in Root's development, where early on we actually tested a um, pretty significant and thorough iconography strategy. We were like,
Mm,
how much of this game can we were basically like, we are making a highly asymmetric game here.
mm,
Is the iconography good for that? Like this is one of those things where like, we were trying to go from vast
mm.
um to which is insane asymmetry where like there's not a lot of connective tissue to
At all.
like
Yeah, yeah.
get the whole table in on like a common language and common
Right,
terminology. We were going from vast to root, which had more of an ethos of, okay, how can we keep this like really quite asymmetric but bring a little bit more of that connective tissue
right.
in with
But we all have to
common.
use the same words at least. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so, like, early on, we had this big question of just like, is iconography good? Just like this very fundamental usability question. And so there actually was a period of time in Roots development where we were really experimenting with like very iconography heavy strategies.
Mm,
And it didn't really work. There's only
right.
for an asymmetric game, there's only really so far that you can get without it getting super messy. And so
Yeah.
we we we,
It's
we ditched it
it's
for
actually
most things, the most important things
right.
being victory points and cards, basically.
Right. It's
Um,
just very funny because we were just playtesting somebody's game that's like a kind of trading card game, kind of adjacent to Magic, and they were using like so many icons, and I was
mhm,
just and by the end of it we were like, you no, no, too many. There were like 14 different
yep,
icons, and we were like, just use words. It turns
yeah,
out words are good for a reason.
yeah. Words are good. Words are good for a reason, as long as you don't have too many of them in a way that's not styled
Right.
properly, in a way where it all just looks like a big mush.
A
So,
big mush. Yeah. It's like just
yeah.
just use the words.
Um, yeah. So yeah, there was an icon route at one point that looked like a mess. Um, Yeah, let's just wrap up the few little odds and ends here with the berry stuff. Um, I guess we'll start with the dens. This kind of
Mm.
secret. This is like a secret, one of those secret berry abilities, one of those dirty
The
secrets of
dirty
root, which
ones
is
in the other boxes.
sometimes we don't have enough room for all the berries. And this is one of those cases, unfortunately. Which is the way that you rescue hostages. So whenever you remove a den, so when an enemy removes a den, you're going to get to rescue a hostage +1 for every excess hit. So what does that mean? Basically, any hits that don't get assigned to something
Hmm.
that overflow. So if you roll a 3 and you've dealt a hit and you have 2 hits left over that aren't going anywhere, those are going to rescue hostages.
Nice.
Um, you can either remove those hostages so they go back to your supply. So you're just like
Hmm.
you are freeing them, but they are running off into the ether and
Into the
maybe
fields.
into the fields, never to be seen again. They don't want anything to do with this war. Alternatively, if Coffin Makers is in the game, maybe they trip over a tree branch and they like die.
And they land in a
Um,
coffin.
Alternatively, if it's an enemy warrior that you're freeing, maybe you execute them. Ooh,
Mm.
grim. But you can remove them, or you can spend a matching card of the den's clearing to place any of them there. So you can be like, I spend a fox card. It's a fox clearing. I can stick a bunch of my warriors
Right.
back in that
Kind of
clearing. So,
field hospital-esque.
yeah, it's like field hospitals, but for right there, basically.
Right.
So, um, so yeah, that's rescuing hostages.
So also just notably, um, because lizards are the thorn in everyone's side. This is removing them does not count as them dying in battle, and thus they don't get to go into
That
acolytes.
is true. I will not. So I mean, I guess I'll just say it. With the lizards, if I went back and redeveloped them, I would change that rule too to be something more like whenever cult warrior is removed, except when attacking in battle.
Right.
For example, like something more expansive like that. Just because there have been enough. It's just like, for example, it is extremely silly that a Corvid bomb can go off and lizards don't become acolytes. Like that's
Right.
just it's just silly.
And it's like
Um,
it's just the funniest thing whenever anyone is developing a fan faction that has something kind of like and then things get removed and it's not battle. It's like
right.
then things get
Yeah.
removed as if it was battle, but it's not battle,
Right.
but
Right.
we have to put this in
Exactly.
here because of lizards.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things where yeah, well, like we have kept saying this about our games until arcs. Arcs we really reformed. We're
Mhm.
we're we're learning here. Root, we were like, oh yeah, we're full expansion, last expansion.
Yeah,
We're not going to make any more. Like
no worries, right?
not we're not going to design it for more. And then obviously we made a lot more. And we've said that for like every game we've ever made, basically, and we've always broken that idea.
Right,
And so we're finally just like, okay, we make intricate games that have a lot of design space and a lot of cool things that we can play around with.
right,
So we're gonna make expansion for them. Cool,
right. They're,
whatever.
they're gonna
So now
happen.
we're actually planning for it. But
Future
yeah, I would
proofing,
definitely
yeah.
change that rule if I could.
Go
It's
back in
unfortunate.
time.
It's basically just one of those things where I have changed rules in Root before,
Right.
but I at this point changing a rule that is on a player board is
Yeah, it's
just
so hard. Yeah.
it's just you can't do it. If you do it, chaos enters the realm of Root, and everybody is going to start losing their minds. So
Right, right.
so anyway, berry abilities. So we got some stuff about your captain here. Your captain is just a warrior. So like unlike the vagabond, which is a pawn, has all these weird things. Captain is just a warrior. It's just a cool warrior. The only thing that you should know about it is that when it's removed, you just get rid of an item and you stick it in adjacent forest. And if it's your turn, you can't like do anything else with it that turn.
Right.
It just stops acting. Pretty straightforward. Sneaky. You ignore rule while moving alone. So if you're just moving one warrior or like just your captain, you ignore rule. So you're sneaky guys, and you can move in and out of force. You can just do that.
I also just love the like the thought that there will be times where it is appropriate and like the right thing to do to like have three guys in one clearing and be like, I move one and then I move another one and then I move another one.
Hmm.
It's
Yep.
just like
Yeah.
the best
We'll
image.
yeah, like that is kind of like that's a critical component of that like conceit that I was talking about earlier about like it's like the warlord, but not really. Like
But
it's really kind
not
of
at
flipped
all,
on its
right?
head. Where like yeah, like you know, your dens are going to be producing these single warriors, and
Mm,
like it may be worthwhile just to like move one warrior over here so that this den is a bit more protected, or
right.
so that it has more stopping power next turn or whatever. Um, so we'll see if that remains true throughout the rest of development, but that's kind of part of that conceit. Then we got dens of scum and villainy. As I said before, clearings hold only one den, and then this is kind of the other part of that like warlord, but totally flipped on its head conceit. Each time a hidden den takes a hit in battle, you may spend a matching card to ignore it. So you
Right.
can soak hits with cards
Right. You just
with
be like,
hidden dens,
give you all these cards into the
right?
discard and
Like no,
ignore.
no, no. So this is basically like this is creating uncertainty around for like factions that want to come and fight you. This is creating that uncertainty of like, well, normally when a clearing only has a building and one warrior and I have three, like it's just a gimme. Like, okay, I go in there,
Roll in.
I'll
Yeah.
attack whatever, I'll just roll and I'll probably kill it.
Right.
But this gives enough of that plausible deniability where because the knaves, you'll notice actually, you'll notice that the knaves, the stuff that they use cards for,
Hmm.
besides that, there's not really like anything that they use
Guys.
cards for except this.
Ooh, sorry.
It's
Ooh.
it's it's basically just for soaking hits.
Right. It's
So
basically
like, you
crafting.
know,
Yeah.
and crafting, yeah, of course. But like because they are not real, that card flow is not really being sucked away in many other places.
Hmm.
They can they can strategize around this. They can be like, okay, so I've got two mice. Great. That's just literally two
Hmm.
hits
Right. Then you can
in
just.
mouse clearings that I just don't need to worry about, basically. So which can be a lot. If somebody
Right.
needs to do, it needs to realistically do two battle actions instead of one to actually place you in a specific clearing,
Mm,
that can be pretty significant. So,
right. So
um,
just since I have you here, rules clarification wise, it's
yes,
just the den that can soak the hits. It's not.
yep, hidden dens,
It's
yep,
not. It's
hidden
not
dens specifically.
your warriors that are at the hidden den can't soak any hits.
Yes, correct. Yep,
Right.
yeah. This is all like your warriors will die. Blah blah blah. Hits go in, and then any hits that would go to a den, you can just
Right. You
ignore
can.
by
Yeah.
spending matching
One
cards.
one for one.
Yep, one for one. Yep. And then finally we have names come first, which we already talked about.
Yeah. Mm,
So yeah,
nice.
that's it. That's the
That's
factions.
the
That's all of
factions.
them.
The
That's the
maybe
factions.
slightly more exhaustive than we than we intended
Yeah,
originally, but
I guess I just got it. I just got into it. I was just
no, it's one of those things where like you get at some point you're just like, you know what? At some point you kind of have to just explain it.
yep.
Yeah.
I felt
Um,
the spirit moving through me.
right.
So
So there is obviously quite a lot more in the PNP that we probably just won't go into because we're running short on time, and I'd like to ask some questions here and there. So there is obviously the three hirelings that are quite interesting, and a whole host of cards in this deck. We could probably spend 2 hours literally just talking about the deck because
Mhm.
I love so many of the cards that are in it. There's some really just super interesting design stuff going on in the deck, and I can't wait to just like get it to an actual table. It's one thing playing with decks and playing Root, on TTS, but then when you actually get it at the table and hold it in your hands, and
yeah,
it's just like, oh, this is so much better. And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
very,
No,
very
it
much
is
looking forward to
always
that. Yeah.
yeah, for me definitely that moment where you get the first prototype from the factory. It's just
Hmm.
like, oh,
You can like
cool.
pick up the actual meeple and pick up the cards
Yep,
that have the linen
yep,
finish. You're like, ah, this is
yeah.
good. Yeah.
Speaking of
Uh,
which, though, one thing that we should share is the new hireling
oh my
meeples. This
God,
is this will be the first time
they're
that
so good.
that these two guys are being shown. So
He's so happy.
Yep, so happy. And the decks the decks too, but the decks were on the Kickstarter page, so those
Right,
aren't
right.
exactly new, but the decks also very
Yes,
cute.
very cute, very
So
cute.
yep.
Yes. It's they pulled out this frog warrior who's labeled as a bat warrior, by the way.
Yes, yeah.
But they pulled this out the other day when we were doing hirelings, and I was just like, "What is that?"
Uh-huh.
It's so good. Like, okay, well, that's my new favorite meeple. Cool.
The trials and travails of development, finding
Yes,
names as being one
fine.
of them. So
Names being one of the hardest. Yes,
yep.
yes. Anyway, that is the Homeland's expansion for Root, or at least the three factions. There's much, much more in the PNP that's coming out today. Like I said at the beginning, a link for that will be down in the description. And Josh, do you want to share your socials? Where can people find you, talk to you, ask you questions?
Yeah, so with the all the crazy stuff that's been going on with social media recently over the past couple of years, I'm not very much on the big social media platforms anymore.
Hmm.
But where you can talk with me is if you come onto Leader Games Discord, the Woodland Warriors.
Hmm.
I am on there pretty often. If you basically catch me in root chat
Hmm.
sometime, um, enter into the conversation, ask me any questions you like. Yeah, so I'm on Woodland Warriors Discord. Also, if you email us, if you email Leader Games,
Hmm.
I will respond to you. If you ask for me, I will respond to you.
The social media of the millennials is Discord.
Yes.
Well,
Alternatively, if you're a Kickstarter backer, you can ask a question in our Kickstarter comments. So
right, right. As you all should be, right?
yeah.
Everybody did it. Um, well, thank you for watching. There is going to be, in a day or two, a designer interview where I will ask bunches and bunches of questions. That video will be up imminently as well. So check back in a day or two, and that'll be up also. And other than that, everyone, bye bye.